Breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. Ohio State quarterback Stroud has declared for the NFL draft ahead of the deadline for underclassmen Monday. Stroud has earned Heisman finalist honors each of the past 2 seasons after throwing for over 8,000 yards and 85 touchdowns with 12 interceptions over 25 career starts. During his time as a Buckeye, he was a 2-time Big Ten Offensive Player and Quarterback of the Year, a finalist for the Maxwell Award, Manning Award, Davey O'Brien Award, Walter Camp Player of the Year Award, and Johnny Unitas Gold Arm Award. There was some thought that he might stay with the Buckeyes for another season to a lucrative NIL deal, but instead he opts to enter the draft. He is projected to be a top 10 pick. Could he be a number 1 pick? I mean, in terms of the odds to be first overall, plus 200. Bryce Young is the betting favorite at minus 125. All right, let's bring in our NFL draft expert, Ryan Wilson, to talk about this. Ryan, first, your reaction to C.J. Stroud declaring for the NFL draft.
That sounds about right. I was actually more surprised that there were rumors that he may return to Ohio State. You mentioned the NIL money that could have been on the table there, and I'm sure it was, but it makes more sense that he would come out in this quarterback class. Next year's quarterback class has just as good a chance of being as competitive as this one. We project these things 12 months out, and they always change. But as we sit here, he's going to have a real chance, Jeremy, and we saw that with those odds there, to be the first quarterback taken. And I don't say that from a gambling perspective. I say that from talking to folks around the league perspective, because we know about Bryce Young. We've talked about him a ton on HQ, and the issues are that he's 5'10", 185 in that range. Everything else is an A+ when you look down the report card. C.J. Stroud does a lot of things well, and he has the height and the weight and the slash measurables that you're looking for in a franchise quarterback. And here's the deal, Jeremy. The big question about C.J. Stroud, ironically enough, going into that Georgia semifinal game was, well, we know he can throw the ball from the pocket. He does that well. He does that better than Justin Fields when Justin Fields came out of Ohio State. But is he mobile enough in today's NFL? Yeah, it turns out he is. He's plenty mobile. He showed, perhaps in his best game of his Ohio State career, how he can win with his legs and his arms. And he gave that Georgia defense all sorts of fits. And that Georgia defense is going to have a ton of guys drafted, starting with Jalen Carter in the middle of that unit. So I think C.J. Stroud left Ohio State with an exclamation point in terms of the way he played. And he very well may have played himself into that QB1 conversation by the time we get around to the draft here in late April.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, you have him in the mock draft going to the Raiders, but there are obviously a number of teams that have quarterback issues. But at this point in his development, I mean, do you think that he's a QB1 guy, or is he a guy that's going to need to sit for some time, a little bit of seasoning needed?
No, we live in an age, Jeremy, where those quarterbacks have to play day one almost universally, and it's not necessarily the right decision, but we're working on 2 different time frames here, right? You're talking about developmental quarterbacks, even though they're first-round talents, who maybe need a year or 2 or 3 to develop, while GMs and head coaches are working basically month to month, so they don't have time to wait around and see how the movie ends. So they will put those kids out there and give them a chance. And I think C.J. Stroud is equipped to succeed early on. Now, at the end of the day, it does matter where you end up. Brock Purdy would tell you that he probably much prefers playing in San Francisco than he would play in, say, Cleveland, for example, or Indianapolis. And that is a huge deal. But the problem is when you are a top 10 pick, or maybe the first overall pick, a quarterback, typically you're going to a terrible football team. So there are going to be some things to have to be sorted out. The Bears have the first pick. They'll probably trade down. And maybe that provides an opportunity for a team with a better record to move up and get their quarterback of the future, whether it's a Bryce Young, Will Levis, or C.J. Stroud. But I think C.J. can play from day one. We know what he can do from the pocket. He doesn't throw with a ton of anticipation, but when you're throwing to guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., who's wide open, or Jackson Smith-Njigba, when he played before this season, it's hard to throw guys open because they're already open. But I think the addition of what he can do in the pocket, and additionally to what he can do with his legs outside the pocket, which he proved to all his doubters in that Georgia game, he's going to make some noise. And it's rarely, Jeremy, the case that NFL teams will let a bowl game sway their decisions. And so teams are going to go back and think a little longer and a little harder about that athleticism that we didn't see over the first 2 years or so. And that'll go into their calculus where they end up putting C.J. Stroud on their draft board when it's all said and done.
But as you accurately pointed out, I mean, not just any bowl game. He's playing in the college football playoff semifinals against a team that turned out to be a 2-time national champion who provided, all kinds of challenges, and he certainly rose to the occasion. Ryan, you've been through this draft process a number of times now. How much can things change between the time a player declares, a player like Stroud, who is projected to be a top 10, possibly top 5 pick, maybe even number 1, how much can things change between now and when the draft goes in April?
No, that's a great question, Jeremy. That's a question that I put to our general manager, as I like to call him, Rick Spielman, the former Vikings GM for more than 10 years, who I do a podcast with. And here's what he'll tell you, and he says it all the time. This is when you find out who this person is off the football field and how they are around their teammates and how smart they are and how they respond to negativity. Because a lot of times what you'll see happen, especially in these combine interviews or these personal interviews, and Rick will tell you this, is that we'll put up a lot of bad tape and say, okay, why in God's name would you do something like this? And you're more interested in listening in response and how they react to a moment that maybe they don't feel great about, more so than the actual answer. And I think that's what changes as we go through this process. There are guys whose tape is A-plus tape, and then perhaps there's C-minus individuals off the field, and there's vice versa situations. So I think that's where the changes come. The other thing to watch out for, of course, Jeremy, we see this every time when we televise these pro days, is that not just media members, but NFL personnel can fall in love with a player when they see him in person, especially a quarterback who's throwing the ball around the field and goes 55 for 55 against air, and suddenly he's the next great thing. And not to come down on Zach Wilson, but remember Zach Wilson's pro day was supposed to be life-changing for a lot of people. Turns out it was life-changing in the wrong direction for the Jets. As we sit here, maybe everything changes, but those are the things you have to guard against as you go through this process.
NFL draft expert Ryan Wilson joining us here on HQ. The breaking news, C.J. Stroud, the Ohio State redshirt sophomore quarterback, has declared for the 2023 NFL draft. Thanks, Ryan. Great stuff as always. And Ryan's going to be breaking this down. Certainly, he mentioned our resident general manager, Rick Spielman. They do a podcast together with the first pick. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. They're going to be discussing C.J. Stroud and Ryan's latest mock draft, which, of course, he has Stroud going to the Raiders at 5, but he might be moving him up a little bit. We'll see. You can listen to With the First Pick wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.